on Game Rank's 8 new gaming trends that suck. So starting off here with number 8 is cosmetic DLC becoming pay-to-win camouflage. I mean, it is really frustrating. Basically, fans and critics alike spent a long time making pay-to-win into a bad term. Tons of people in all areas of gaming railed against paid DLC that gave you some kind of an advantage in competitive games. People understand that pay to win is, well, bad. It makes games bad. It unbalances them, screws up the gameplay mechanics, and ultimately makes them less fun. So these big publishers went, okay. We understand. We hear you. We're listening. We're taking on the criticisms. We're taking accountability. And most games are very, very specific in making sure that you know all of the DLC stuff is cosmetic. Well, what's the principle of camouflage? It is using a cosmetic disguise to reduce your visibility in a situation where you wouldn't want to be seen. Like, oh, I don't know, maybe like a competitive shooter or something. So you end up seeing these games like Warzone and Fortnite tossing in these all-black, cosmetic-only DLC in-game appearance modifications, which more or less make it difficult to see the character. Yeah, it's pay to win. Like, is it officially pay to win? No, it doesn't conform to any mechanical description of that. However, because the human eye works the way that it does, it gives you an advantage that you pay for in a competitive situation. I hate it so much. At number 7 are these genuinely insane mobile game ads. Like, if I just described them to you and criticized them, I would sound like a 1990s parent angry about, like, sexy movies, but, like, these things are actually insults to our intelligence. A, we know the games don't look like this. We know, without even playing the games, the game doesn't look like this. These are like RTS games, and they try to sell you on the idea that they're just completely different than they actually even are. I'm gonna go ahead and say, like, I know what a mobile game looks like, and while they've certainly advanced to the point where graphics are really good, they don't look like these commercials. And even if they did, these would not be interesting games for particularly long. Like, to be frank, there are other areas of the internet that you can go and get what these things are offering for free and, let's say, better. I don't care that they're using sex to sell the games. Like, that's not something that particularly bothers me. It's just such a huge insult to my intelligence. Like Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball does it better, I promise you, than whatever shitty bottom of the barrel RTS game that's not even good for its genre these things are selling. At number 6, these big companies acting like they didn't want people to use the loot boxes. Like, we all know what a loot box is. We know it's predatory. We know it's gambling at this point. And we know that you made them so people will use them. Like, this EA Sports leak where they were pretending that somehow, despite the fact that they put the mechanic in the game and it's a mechanic that makes them tons of money, they weren't actively pushing people to use it. Oh, we just put it in there for fun, you know? We didn't think people would really use it. What? Like, they actually had the gall to deny this leaked information that showed them as saying they're incentivizing players to convert, which, if you're unaware, convert is marketing speak for purchase, throughout the summer. They obviously have denied it because they're in legal trouble in a bunch of countries because, hey, most people have woken up to the fact that these things are just gambling. They tried to claim that the idea that they used predatory practices and language was a sensationalized story with a misrepresentation of the facts, and that they do not push people to spend in our games, which that's just such a load of crap. We know, and they know we know, they just know they have to officially act like we don't, and nothing will happen to them, which is the truth. I mean, is that really the trend here? There are a couple of things here that are frankly the trend that I'm angry about, to be completely honest. At number 5, a big open world with 90% filler content. Like, I want to say that this has been around for a bit, but it's going strong. In fact, I would say it's maybe stronger now than ever. This has kind of been a thing since open world games began to become popular, but it's a major issue. Like, publishers and developers just love to lard up their games with tons of unnecessary and uninteresting content that you kind of have to grind through because they want a 20 or 30 hour game to be a 100-hour game and they can be like, you got your money's worth with them, didn't you? Ubisoft's probably the reigning kings of this kind of game, with the newest Assassin's Creed games just getting longer and longer, with more and more little dots on the map to find. With Valhalla, they tried to make the side content more interesting and varied, and the games are still fun, to be clear, but it does mostly boil down to sneaking through outposts and collecting treasures. Like, even if it doesn't stop the game itself from being fun, that doesn't change the fact that the game would be better without it. Another massive game people rightly complain about how shallow it is Fallout 76. Honestly, people complain about Fallout 4 and how it was just clearing out buildings and caves on a map, but at least the enemies in that one didn't randomly spawn, and in Fallout 4 they had decent AI. I don't want to say that they were perfect or amazing or anything, but they were worth it. Fallout 76 has improved a lot in the story department from where it was first released by actually adding, NPCs. But the world is still mostly empty with very little interesting content, unless you really enjoy reading notes and listening to audio logs while brainless enemies spawn behind you. Hell, this complaint is a major one for one of the biggest games of last year. Cyberpunk 2077, in theory, should be an amazing map, but it's just filled with all these side gigs to do that aren't the sort of thing you'd really care to experience in that game. There's not a lot of story or role-playing attached to most of these missions. They're just go here, kill enemies type stuff. It gets repetitive and boring so quick too. The actual game can be completed relatively quickly if you ignore these things too, but if you want to finish everything, it's going to take more than 100 hours to mop up all of this crap. Players demand content in their games. There's not a small group of gamers who simply won't accept a game that takes less than 30 hours to finish. Just look at all the hand-wringing about game length before a major game comes out. If someone is going to drop 60 or 70 bucks on a game, many want it to keep them playing for a long time. But that doesn't excuse filling up a bunch of time with crap. I mean, sure, some of them do just want to play the game for longer, regardless of how repetitive it is. But if you ask them, would you rather have good content that lasts that long rather than repetitive content? Their answer would be yes. At number 4 is the constant loot notifications. This exists in full-scale games, but this is really one that you see in mobile gaming. After you beat a match and you leave the game and later on you happen to notice that they've got a damn notification saying you left your loot box. Or even when you haven't played for a while and you need to collect your loot. Or if you don't play, you can't get loot. God, I'm tired of loot. I mean in video games, not in real life. I think we could all use more loot in real life. We're all pirates, right? And to even go a step further, the notifications are super annoying, but I beat somebody in a match in some game and it's all right, now unlock 50 things. It's as much work to press all the things I have to unlock to progress in the game. I know that's a more generalized gripe, and the real thing that I'm talking about here is the notifications, but enough guys, lighten up on the loot. At number 3, when a game is oh, we're not gonna add that thing to it. Don't worry. We don't want to force that kind of stuff on you. Just buy our game. Buy it, that's not in the game. And then later they add it to the game. The example we were kicking around the GameRanks office was Doom Eternal, which they were we're not adding paid skins, guys. Don't worry, we're not gonna throw paid skins into this game. That stuff, that's not our thing, right? Understand? We won't do that to you, homies. That's not us. I'm vaguely amused at the idea they would put out a press release that says, we're not going to do that to you, homies. That's what they did, though. They said they weren't going to do it, and then they did it. Another example I feel is worth bringing up is Crash Team Racing, which they were flat out saying they weren't going to add microtransactions into. They're saying this is straight remakes for serious gamers. Everybody buy it so that we can have a nice little sales number. And then they were oh, microtransactions. Guess we changed our mind on that one, which they didn't. It was in the plan all along. They had in-game currency. We all knew the microtransactions were coming. And what sucks is that both Doom Eternal and Crash Team Racing, these are both great games. Great games we bought thinking would remain as great as they are on day one that didn't. And number 2 are these insanely long grinds to unlock items. It's not one that's exactly new, again, but it's a scourge. And again, kind of an accelerating scourge. Like when we were talking about the big open worlds thing, seems like that's more of a thing now than it ever was. This too. What we're talking about is like, instead of giving the player a like steady stream of unlocks, for whatever reason, developers and publishers just make it incredibly tediously awful, a slog to unlock any of the crap you want. Like, it's especially notable in like a lot of the free-to-play games out there. One of the worst offenders is Destiny 2, especially now. Like, a lot of us thought that some of the more annoying aspects of the grind would be lessened or even outright removed when Bungie left Activision, but that wasn't the case. In a lot of ways, the grind for certain exotics and rewards actually got worse. And can we talk about how if you didn't want to pay for any currency or loot boxes, it would take about 40 hours to get Darth Vader in Star Wars Battlefront 2 when it first came out? Yeah, any game with a battle pass also. That's going to force some kind of crappy grind on you. What's worse is that they're time consuming and they're on a time limit. So if you want to get certain things, you got to finish the battle pass before it expires. And a few games are more lenient, while others are a lot worse. In general, the whole idea, though, is at least a little less annoying than loot boxes. But they basically slop randomness and chance for unending grind. And if you don't put in the time, you're definitely not getting your money's worth, which sucks because you're literally buying it. You're buying the opportunity to work for items. Honestly, games with crazy grinding in them have been around almost as long as gaming itself, but this is usually like RPGs and Korean MMOs that were the worst offenders. But recently, we've really been starting to see a lot of these tactics make their way into more mainstream games like Call of Duty. It's really up to the player to decide how much is too much, it's taste. But for us at least, these kinds of equipment grinds in games are just really boring and not fun at all. And finally, at number 1, let's call it releasing games in a state comparable to an early access release without calling them early access. Probably the biggest one in the last decade was Cyberpunk 2077. Like, everyone expected that to be huge and, complete after having taken roughly 9 years. 9 years it took to make Cyberpunk. And it came out like that. I mean, there are other pretty big ones, though, like Fallout 76, for all intents and purposes. I mean, the state that came out in, totally ridiculous. We talked about it so much when it came out. They've done a lot of things to improve the game, but for me, it was unforgivably bad. And then you throw in all the ridiculous merchandising crap that they did alongside Fallout 76, where they were selling canvas bags and mailing out nylon ones that were all wrinkly and crappy, and doing Fallout 76 booze, which is I guess not the worst thing in the world, but when you're doing all the other stuff, looks terrible. Another example is No Man's Sky, which actually, as mad as people were, as little as I liked it personally when it happened, they did make that into a much better game over time. But I would say that's probably the one example where I feel like it's okay or worth it. Like pretty much all the other ones, especially Cyberpunk, still make me mad when I think about it. But what about you? How many of these types of things stick in the back of your throat when you're trying to swallow them? Leave us a comment.